Hello, my name is Lori Lubin, and I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Letters and Science. I would like to welcome all of you to our Letters and Science webinar, which is celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Professors for the Future PFTF program. This long-standing program has provided PhD students and postdoctoral scholars with the skills and knowledge needed to excel in their future careers in academia and beyond. It has also had a positive effect on the UC Davis graduate student community as PFTF fellows execute their own academic service projects during their year-long fellowships. Since the inception of this program, the College of Letters and Science has had a whopping 125 fellows. Today, we are honored to introduce you to three of those fellows, one from each of our three divisions: mathematical and physical sciences, humanity, arts and cultural studies, and social sciences. They will undoubtedly share their experiences with the PFTF program, the twists and turns of their career paths, and of course, their wisdom for young researchers today. We will have a question and answer period after the three talks, so please put your questions for the speakers in the Q&A feature. So first up, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Roy Gal, who is my own postdoctoral scholar 20 years ago in the now Department of Physics and Astronomy. He's also my longtime collaborator and friend. Dr. Gal received his PhD from Caltech in 2001 and is now associate astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii. Dr. Gal is an expert on the effect of different environments on the properties of galaxies and how these environments affect a galaxy's formation and evolution over time. He is also the Institute for Astronomy's outreach coordinator, bringing the beauty of astronomy to a wider audience through school visits, stargazing events, public talks, outreach, and more. Dr. Gal has the unique capability of being able to engage and educate the community and students, something that is really rare among professional researchers. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gal.
Aloha, I guess I have to say, being here in Hawaii, and big mahalo or a thank you to Lori and the PFTF program for inviting me to tell you a little bit about my experience with PFTF, what it's meant to me, and to talk to you about my career experience and maybe provide some insights that you'll find useful. So as Lori said, I was a postdoctoral scholar at UC Davis. That was actually my second postdoctoral position in the early 2000s. I graduated from Caltech, and I'm originally from New York. So I moved from New York, where I went to Columbia as an undergrad, moved across the country to Pasadena, California, to do my PhD, moved back to the East Coast to Maryland, where I worked at Johns Hopkins on the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, then back to Northern California for my second postdoc. Then I was in Virginia, University of Virginia, for a year before moving to Hawaii. So as many of you probably know, that's one of the hallmarks of an academic career, and especially in the sciences and astronomy, doing 2 postdoctoral positions, or 2.5 is average. So moving around and being flexible that way is something you can either look forward to or dread, depending on your perspective. And that is something to think about in your future careers, is in terms of work-life balance and stability, what that means for you. I talk to my undergraduate students about this all the time, because I think many students, maybe even in graduate school, aren't quite aware of what an academic career looks like in their field. And I do think that both PFTF and your individual mentors can do a good job of helping you understand what that means for you. So I definitely think you should ask about that and think about that. I try to show my students who are beginning their astronomy careers as undergraduates, well, think about your high school friends and what they're going to do with their lives if they enter a real, I was going to say a real job, a non-academic job, and versus what it's like to have an academic career. They both have their pros and cons, and I think it's important for people to go in to those with their eyes wide open and understand what's coming for them. So in my career path, as I said, I moved a lot of places, but when I moved to Hawaii, I was actually a trailing spouse. So my tenure track position here at the University of Hawaii, and I was offered a 1-year visiting scientist position. And unlike UC Davis, which I don't know how it is now, but back when I was there as a postdoc, I actually had quite progressive and good spousal hiring policies. The University of Hawaii did not. And it was a long fight to get me into somewhat of a longer term position. And I'm now tenured associate faculty, which was many twists and turns. And if anyone has questions about that, I'm happy to answer them later or talk to them about it. But that highlights one of the other things that I think it's worth thinking about is the often two-body problem in academia. So if you have a partner who is in academia and is less flexibility in where they can move, thinking about how to solve that and understanding how to deal with that, and that there's special things that you can negotiate, and it's not as black and white as it might seem, is also important and useful to know. So in terms of the PFTF program, the reason I signed up to apply to be a Professors for the Future Fellow is that in science, in the natural sciences, there is essentially no training in pedagogy, no training on how to teach. And yet most of our jobs involve teaching. And most of us who get PhDs in, for instance, astronomy, are not going to end up at top-tier research universities where we might have somewhat less of a teaching load, but we'll have a higher teaching load. So recognizing that and recognizing that I had no training in teaching and that my next job would probably be a faculty job, I thought I'd better learn how to teach. Because in my career, I had quite a few bad teachers. That's not uncommon in the sciences, unfortunately, especially at research universities, which is where I spent my undergraduate and graduate career. And I had a few good teachers, and I wondered how they had learned to teach. So doing the PFTF program was incredibly valuable. We discussed how to produce a syllabus, and in fact, it showed me how poor most of the syllabi I had ever received from my teachers, my professors, had been. And so thinking about course content, course structure, rubrics and metrics, a lot of things that I never saw when I was a student, and that looking back, I realized made it much harder for me as a student and probably for my classmates to understand. What are we getting graded on besides of an exam grade? What is the professor looking for? What are their expectations? What resources are there to help us throughout our academic journey? So even basic things like putting together a course syllabus is not something that we necessarily learn how to do, and most of us learn from experience or by examples. And unfortunately, many of the examples we have aren't the greatest. I also realized from a PFTF program that there's been a lot of work, a lot of actual academic research in appropriate ways to teach, in methodologies that work for diverse learning styles, and how to incorporate that kind of thing, most of which I'd never seen in my classrooms. I'd never seen that demonstrated. And whether those are things like doing peer learning, there's something in astronomy and probably in other fields called think, pair, share, flipped classrooms, things like that, that I had never experienced. All of my classes were kind of what you're experiencing now, which is a lecture, someone talking at you, a talking head, which is what I am on your screen, with some slides behind them, hopefully well made, but often not, or working at a blackboard and just talking, and you would take notes, and hopefully somehow by osmosis that information and knowledge and understanding would come into you. And what I've learned in both in PFTF and in my personal experience is that traditional mode of learning doesn't work, and we actually know from scientific research what are better ways to teach. And I hope that those of you who are current PFTF fellows or are thinking about being PFTF fellows really think about and take advantage of the opportunities that you have in PFTF to learn about these methodologies and think about projects that can help your fellow graduate students or future graduate students or people in your other academic units benefit from improved mentoring and teaching. But I also want to stress that the PFTF, you shouldn't look at it as, oh, I've taken PFTF and I've learned how to teach and I'm good to go. I think in most fields, I assume there's specific educational tools that can be really helpful. I'm an astronomer, and we have the American Astronomical Society, which is sort of the overarching professional society for those of us in the United States. And they run a series of astronomy education workshops through the Center for Astronomy Education. And that kind of continuing professional development that I found extremely useful. I would like to encourage those of you who've taken PFTF to go on and look for those opportunities within your own specific fields. And in fact, astronomy, it turns out Astro 101 is probably the most popular introductory sort of science requirement fulfilling class in the United States. 250,000 students a year take it at colleges. And it's often many students' last contact with science. So the National Science Foundation has actually poured a lot of effort into how to teach Astronomy 101. And that may exist in many other fields as well, how to teach introductory classes, which many of you may end up teaching, and may be a way for you to reach many either students who might convert to your major, or where it's their last opportunity to really learn and get something out of your field. And it might even make your life easier. So for instance, the astronomy education workshops I've taken have introduced tools. There's one called Lecture Tutorials in Introductory Astronomy, that actually learning how to use them and how they work actually reduces my workload, because someone's prepared worksheets, they've shown me how to use them, and I can actually give them to students, walk around the classroom, see students working together in pairs, and I don't have to prepare 15 minutes of lecture for that hour-long lecture. Instead, they're going to be working, and then we're going to be talking about it. And so doing that sort of continuing education, as many doctors and other professionals have to do, is something I'd really like to encourage people to do, especially within their own fields. There's probably a lot of tools out there that maybe you never saw as a student, because unfortunately, quite few of our academic colleagues so far have implemented those, especially in the more research-intensive universities. So that's what I want to say about like learning about pedagogy and learning how to teach, which I think is a big part of PFTF. But as Laurie said, I am also the outreach coordinator at the Institute for Astronomy, and that's been a lifelong passion of mine. And actually doing outreach in public education is very similar to teaching in a classroom, especially for introductory classes. And even as a graduate student, I had done outreach when I was at Caltech. I did tours of Palomar Observatory and created signage for the observatory that when I was going to observe, I was like, how come the public is looking through these windows and there's nothing explaining what they're looking at? That doesn't make any sense. But it had been that way for 50 years and no one had ever bothered to do anything until me and some of my classmates did something about it. So finding ways to make yourself an integral part of your department that is also fulfilling to you is a great way to sort of help enhance your academic career. So as I said, I arrived at the University of Hawaii in a non-tenure track visiting position. And the reason I was switched to tenure track, which is extremely rare, is that I basically took over or started a bunch of functions in my department that we really needed. As you may know, there are many astronomical observatories in Hawaii. There's a lot of issues with land use and dealing with the indigenous Native Hawaiian population. We're a state university and we are a sun, sea, space, land grant institution. So we have a lot of responsibility, or kuleana, as we say in Hawaiian, to our community. And we didn't have enough people working, enough effort being put into doing that. And so that's something that I really enjoyed doing, and I started doing more and more of, and it eventually became invaluable as a service to my department. And I'm now what's called a specialist. We have a faculty category that is for faculty whose primary duty is not teaching and whose primary duty is not research, but something else. It could be academic support, it could be outreach, it could be extension, where we have people like, for instance, helping farmers with agriculture. That's the position I ended up in, because I do a lot of service and support for my department in terms of community engagement. So for those of you who think, I don't want to teach that much, or I don't want to be that focused on research, it is possible to create a career within academia, or especially outside of it, where that's not the only thing that you're doing. And I think there's more and more recognition that these kind of efforts, where you do something that's beyond your regular teaching duties, is important. So if you want to talk to me about that kind of thing, I'm always happy to talk about it afterwards. And actually, I have to say, I find the most fulfilling thing to be engaging with adults and children out at community events, and to have them be excited to see people I've interacted with, children I've interacted with 10 years ago becoming our students, or to be at an event and have a student looking through a telescope or a child looking through a telescope for the first time and say, oh, this was the best night of my life. That's incredibly fulfilling, way that we don't, we're just writing research papers or a book or something like that. So even if you're a highly researcher or education-focused person, doing that kind of thing that gets you out into the community, I think is a great way to sort of reconnect with the passion that you had or that is driving you to be in your field. Finally, in my last 3 minutes, I'd like to say that also, as you become proceed in your academic career, and Lori is a great example, you tend to take on more and more administrative responsibilities. And that's something that's hard to prepare for and that you might not be thinking about. But I sit on many committees. I'm a chair of my faculty senate's committee on administration and budget, where we are actually checking what our university administration is doing from our faculty side and thinking about how academic and educational policies and things that are being implemented at the legislature impact us and dealing with things like that. And that's something that I think you need to be aware that it's going to consume more and more of your time as you become more and more senior. And for some of us, it can be enjoyable. We're doing something to protect our profession and help it grow, but it is I would say, a significant commitment of our time. And so that's something you should be aware and maybe think about what's going on, talk to your mentors about what it's like in your field in academic careers versus industrial careers and things like that. And finally, the PFTF is great and other opportunities, like I said, astronomy education, meetings. I really encourage people to network. I know many of us, especially younger people, were impacted with the COVID. I have 2 young children. And it was a big deal for people not to be face-to-face, not to have conferences, not to network. But for better or for worse, getting back out there and having those connections both virtually and in person is something I'd really like to encourage everyone to do. And PFTF is a great way to meet people who are outside of your field, but who clearly have similar interests in terms of teaching and becoming good mentors and good educators. So keep in touch with those people, see what they're doing, and help each other out in the future. And I think that ends my 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Professor Gao. My name is Elizabeth Freeman. I'm the Associate Dean of the Faculty for Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies at the College of Letters and Sciences here at UC Davis, and also a professor of English. And I'm here to introduce Professor Rebecca Hogue. So Rebecca Hogue is a 2020 UC Davis English PhD with a designated emphasis in Native American Studies, and a 2018 to 2019 Professors for the Future Fellow. Now, they were also a Mondavi Graduate Fellow, a Mellon Public Scholars Fellow, and a Mellon ACLS Dissertation Completion Fellow while they were a grad student here at UCD. And they've had remarkable success since receiving the PhD. So they've brought their expertise to Harvard first on a 3-year lectureship in history and literature and studies of women, gender, and sexuality. And this upcoming year will be a fellow at the Mahindra Humanities Center, holding an American Council of Learned Societies fellowship concurrently. And they'll begin an assistant professor position at the University of Toronto in fall 2024. Professor Hogue's book manuscript, Nuclear Archipelagos, Radiation Empires and Indigenous Resistance in the Pacific, has been solicited by Duke University Press. And I always pronounce that word wrong, I'm sorry. Archipelagos. Anyway, they're also co-editing with Craig Santos Perez an anthology called For the People, Land, and Sea, Environmental Relations in Oceania and the Pacific Islands for the University of Washington Press, and have co-edited with Anais Maurer a special forum on transnational nuclear imperialisms for Journal of Transnational American Studies. They have guest lectured at Columbia, Harvard, Yale, UVA, Berkeley, and many other places. And I could go on with their accomplishments, but I don't want to use up all their time. So suffice to say that we in English, Native American Studies, the Dean's Office, and the Professors for the Future program are very impressed by Rebecca Hogue and very grateful to have them here today. Thank you, and go Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm extraordinarily moved by your generous introduction. And I am, above all, very grateful to be here with you today and with all of you here in this wonderful webinar. I would also like to express my gratitude to my other mentors at UC Davis. I had the privilege of having the mentorship from both English and Native American Studies, Sean Shu, Margaret Rhonda, Beth Rose Middleton, Mike Zeisler, Mark Jung, and my PFTF mentors, Teresa Dillinger and Ellen Hardigan O'Connor. I'm grateful to you all. As I said, I'm Rebecca, and I come to you today from the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts, now known as Cambridge, Massachusetts. I grew up on the island of Oahu in the Pai'aina, or the archipelago of Hawaii, as the descendant of Scottish and Irish immigrants. I grew up one town over from one of the many military bases on the island. And in my work, I write and teach about the legacies of and ongoing repercussions of empire and militarization in Oceania and the Pacific Islands. This I see as an extension of my personal and political commitments to Indigenous sovereignty and to anti-colonial futures. But today I'm here to talk about my journey as an academic and offer some ideas that I hope will be helpful for those of you who are thinking about continuing a career in the humanities. So for those of you who are working in the humanities, you already know that the job market can be extremely discouraging. It is true that there are not enough jobs in the humanities, or at least not as many tenured track jobs as I think that there should be. But this is not to say that there are not many jobs that one can do with your marvelous skill set as humanists. And I'll happily talk more a little bit about that later. I went on the academic job market 4 years in a row, and until I finally landed a tenure track job. When I began my academic job market journey, I remember being incredibly disheartened when I had a really great conversation with one of my beloved mentors, Margaret Rhonda, who told me and others in my cohort that it often took 3 years or more to land a long-term job, whether that was something that would be tenure track or teaching track or a long-term renewable contract. Surely, I thought, there's no way that that's true. But like often, Margaret was right. She is very often right, if not always right. And so this is one of those challenges where kind of faced with that, did I feel comfortable pursuing a career in which I didn't know whether there would be a future? How would one compare oneself to others, or how would we feel when we're seeing other people get jobs? We often know the people who maybe got jobs the first time on the market, and congratulations to them. But those are the exception, not the rule. As an extension of this, that same year, I had one of the most meaningful conversations of my entire academic career, where I was fortunate to sit down with Professor Beth Freeman. And when we were talking about the job market, we got to talk about expectations. And here I was in awe of Beth, who is such a huge leader in so many different fields, and somebody who is, so widely and universally respected as such a great scholar and teacher. And I think I went in expecting that, the great Beth Freeman must have had all the right answers and knowing the way to do things, and she must have figured it out. But what I really appreciated is that she shared with me her own job market journeys and revealed that there had been many different possible outcomes, that there were many ways for her that it could have turned out differently. And after her telling me her journey, she reminded me too of something that has stayed with me ever since. That she said that she went to grad school with many brilliant people, that it wasn't necessarily the ones who were the smartest or the most talented who were the ones that stayed in the profession, that ultimately it was the ones who were the most persistent. So this is to say that while there is so much in this profession that is entirely out of your control, there are always ways that you can best position yourself for achieving what you want. One of those ways is not to idealize the journey or to expect that it's supposed to go a certain way. So today, for simplicity's sake, I've broken down 2 types of ways that I think can be helpful in preparing. I'll call them field work and heart work. Knowing your profession and knowing your own heart in relation to that profession. So starting with field work. By field work, I don't mean your area of content expertise, though yes, you do need to learn that too. Instead, I mean that you have to think about this profession structurally as a field of discourse production that is constructed in particular ways. So learn everything that you can about your profession as a profession. Learn about it structurally. Learn how it works. What are all those jobs called? And what do they do? What is the difference in work pre and post tenure? What is the difference between an R1, R2, a SLAC, a community college, a regional public, working in a library, working in a humanities organization? There's so many different positions that people can pursue. What is teaching track? More and more of our jobs in the humanities are in teaching track. What types of postdocs are available to you? This is also something that's becoming more and more common in the humanities, whereas previously it was more something that people did in the sciences. You are training to be a researcher. Research the job too. One of the things that I loved most about PFTF were the times that we would get to just hear real talk from our mentors about this thing called being a professor. Professor Ellen Hartigan O'Connor was a truth teller, and I loved this. And I loved hearing about her experiences in navigating the academy and the challenges that she faced along the way. She told us where to spend our time and where to protect our time and where to think about the long game. As a graduate student, I had been so focused on the day-to-day and thinking about myself as a student that I had trouble envisioning myself outside of the present. Ellen's words made me start dreaming big and to think about how I could build a pathway to my future. What were the small things that I could do every day while a student that would prepare me for my career as a professor? If you're a graduate student, be thinking about what you want, and not just when you are a graduate student, but when you are no longer a graduate student. Being a graduate student was always meant to be temporary. You entered this program so that you would finish it and leave it, not that you would stay. The purpose of the program is to learn skills and tools to make relationships and grow them elsewhere. And even if you decide to stay in beautiful Northern California, or even at UC Davis, expand your world outside of your current role to make wider nets of relations. Talk to everyone. Get as many opinions as you can. Find lots of different mentors. There is no one-size-fits-all mentor. No one can tell you exactly the way that you should do anything in particular. One of the best things that my dissertation advisor, Sean Shu, would often do for me is not only would he often present me with options, but he would talk out options with me and brainstorm ideas. But he would actually never tell me what to do. Sometimes I really wanted him to tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do, Sean. I need to know. But ultimately, I learned through this process that the decisions that I faced were not his to make. They were mine. So get involved in the many opportunities that you have at UC Davis. Get involved outside of your department. One of the best things that I did, despite how much I loved the English department, was go meet people outside of it. I did a DE in Native American Studies. I joined the CGPSA, the Chancellor's Advisory Board. I got involved in climate activist work in the Greater Northern California region. The relationships made everything about the day-to-day better and more purposeful. It's easier to know what you want to be doing in some ways once you've learned what you don't. And while you're thinking about creating community, don't forget to invest in you. Apply for everything. When you apply for things, the only thing you lose is the time that it took to apply. But you have the possibility to gain so much more. support groups, experiences, resources, travel. Think expansively about your project. Be your best hype person. Look for grants. Ask many advisors. Talk to others in your field. If you hear about someone in your program winning something, go ask them what it is. That is all to say, small yeses lead to big yeses. This, of course, does not mean that you need to say yes to everything all the time. But for good or for ill, in this profession, yeses beget yeses. Sometimes they start with a risk. In the summer of 2018, I had won my first ever fellowship to travel to do research. It fundamentally changed my life. I never knew that I would get to be a person who would get to do this. After I won that fellowship, I wrote to a scholar I had long admired in Australia. It was a big risk. It was a total cold email. And luckily, she wrote back and agreed to meet. Long story short, meeting her then led to a long-term academic relationship, and then many relationships beyond it. It's now led to countless conference presentations, publications, and most importantly, meaningful friendships in many countries around the world. Yes, it began with taking a risk on one email, but many small yeses along the way really continued to invest in those relationships and sustain them beyond that initial risk. And finally, I want to turn to that second thing, heart work. I won't talk about this as much, but in some ways, it's more important. Heart work is something only you can do in relationship to your profession. This, the academy, the profession, the anxiety, and the imposter syndrome that pervades graduate school, it's real and it's a lot. It really is. So how do we sustain ourselves when there's so much that is so frustrating, that is so challenging? The answer is not necessarily in trying to do it all, right? But instead by having clarity of purpose. Knowing your purpose in pursuing a graduate degree and being very, very honest, perhaps even painfully honest about that purpose is necessary to getting through some of the challenging parts of this role. I was lucky that I chose this career very much on purpose, but that was not entirely about luck. Prior to coming to UC Davis, I had been an independent school teacher. I taught high school. And I come from a family of teachers, but no one in my family had ever pursued graduate education of any kind. They didn't know anything about what graduate education entailed. But while I was being a high school teacher, I soon learned that teaching wasn't enough for me as much as I loved it. I had questions, and I had questions that I wanted to research. And graduate school, in the limited amount that I knew about it, seemed like it might be a right place for me to figure that out. For me, the clarity of purpose has only sharpened over time. So I encourage you to ask yourself, what is your purpose in this profession? This sounds super lofty. I admit that it does, but only through discussing with yourself can you know what these purposes are. You may have many purposes, and whatever the answer is, it doesn't matter to anyone but you. The reminders of why we chose to do this profession are ultimately, I think, what sustain us when it's difficult, and it very often is. When we face disappointment or rejection, which we very often do, I certainly have. As well as when we experience our many versions of success. All of our reasons for doing this job are different. And for some of us, it's our community commitments, our responsibilities, our kuleana, as was mentioned earlier. And for some of us, it's about our families, continuing family legacies, sharing family histories, family stories, right? For others, it's our intellectual or our politically minded, community-driven work. But thinking about how, right? That field work, thinking about the profession in relation to the why, that heart work, right? About you and your commitments and the things that drive you, enables you to know the things that you love and then go after them in this job. So thank you very much. And I'm so excited to get to talk with you all in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was wonderful. I'm going to share what you said with my daughter, who's struggling right now. I want to remind everyone listening, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask them. My name is John Scott. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty in the Social Sciences in the College of Letters and Science. I'm also in the Department of Political Science. It's my pleasure to introduce one of political science's most illustrious graduates, Patricia Sullivan. When I arrived at UC Davis in 2000, Patricia just recently arrived. She was clearly one of the smartest, most ambitious, and hardworking students in the program, and she's gone on to great success. After UC Davis, she graduated from UC Davis in 2004. She went to University of Georgia, where she was an assistant professor. Then University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill hired her away in the policy school, where she still is now as an associate professor. Tricia's book, her research involves strategy of war and conflict. How do leaders use war or conflict as a strategy for policy goals? When do they initiate, escalate, or terminate military operations, for example? Her book, Who Wins? ? Predicting Strategic Success and Failure in Armed Conflict. I think it's a good sense of her research. She has numerous publications in leading journals in international relations and political science. Her research has been supported by a number of agencies, including the Carnegie Corporation, National Science Foundation, Office of Naval Research, among others. So with that introduction, let me introduce you to Patricia Sullivan. Thank you, Tricia.
Thanks so much, John. Looks like I froze there for a second. Thanks so much, John. Thanks for those kind words, and it's good to see you again. So I'm glad to be here, and we'll share just a little bit about my journey and a couple of tips that I hope will be helpful. I think the participating in the Professors for the Future program was the beginning of participating in a number of types of opportunities like this. I did a teaching fellows program, again, at the University of Georgia, a couple of academic leadership programs now that I've been at UNC Chapel Hill. And I think I gained quite a bit from each one of those. I know that participating in the Professors for the Future program, I went into my job search and into my first job as an assistant professor with greater confidence than I think I would have had. I gave me a sense that I knew a little bit more about what the profession was really about, what being a professor was about, beyond just knowing my research area of expertise. Like Roy said, there isn't usually a curriculum about how to teach. There certainly isn't a curriculum in graduate school about how to navigate a university and understand what it takes to thrive in that environment. And so that was developing those skills, or learning at least a little bit more about it, I think was really helpful for me. And I think actually participating may have helped me to get that first job. So as John said, after receiving my PhD in political science from UC Davis, I began a position as an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. My partner and I had adopted a child about 2 years prior to me getting that degree. And so we navigated moving across the country with a 4-year-old buying a house, finding a preschool, prepping new classes, all of that. It was exciting. It was a lot. It was nerve-wracking, but most of all, I think it was a really exciting time. And I didn't think that I necessarily wanted to be in Georgia long term, particularly after going to college and graduate school in Northern California. But I really fell in love with my colleagues in the department and with Athens, Georgia, which is a great town. About year 5, just as I was preparing to come up for tenure, I was offered a position in the public policy department at UNC Chapel Hill. And it was a really tough decision to leave. I very, very nearly didn't take the job. I was happy in my department. We loved Athens. I felt confident about getting tenure and going to this new department. There was much more uncertainty about that. My family was happy where we were and liked the schools. So it was a tough decision, but I thought there'd be greater opportunities for funding and particularly for research collaboration at UNC Chapel Hill. And by this time we had adopted another child, so we moved again, this time with 2 children, one going into 5th grade and one going into 6th grade. So it was a somewhat challenging transition. I felt like I lost 6 to 9 months of research time with all the work of just starting over at a new university and a new type of department, getting the kids started at new schools, navigating a new community, all of that. In the end, I think it's, now that I've been here about 12 years, it didn't take quite that long, but after being here for a while, I definitely felt like it was worth it. It was true that I had greater opportunities for research collaborations and for new funding opportunities, and essentially, becoming involved with a community of scholars in security studies here in the Research Triangle. I am now associate professor in the department, associate chair of the department, and soon to become chair of the department in January, and director of the Triangle Institute for Security Studies, which is a consortium that is founded of Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, NC Central University, and NC State. And one of the longest standing research and education collaborations around national and international security. It's been around for more than 50 years. As a graduate student, I applied and was accepted to present my research at an event, a conference that the Triangle Institute for Security Studies has for what they call new faces, upcoming PhD students that are just finishing up their dissertation and going on the market. I felt when I came out to Duke to give this presentation, I felt like I was out of my depth. I was quite nervous about it, and felt that even though I got a great education at UC Davis, I was among colleagues who were primarily coming from Ivy League schools, a very small number of very high level PhD students with super big name advisors. And so that was something that was a challenge for me. But one of the things that I think I've learned along the way is that I'm now director of that organization, something I never thought that I would be. And I think that one of the things that I've learned over and over again is that it is really worth applying for these opportunities. I think this is something that Rebecca said as well. It's really worth applying for these types of opportunities, even if you don't think you have much of a chance of getting them, even if you're not sure you're qualified. oftentimes you're more qualified than you think you are, and you don't have much to lose in trying. I would also say, in terms of tips, that it is also very worth applying for research funding, even when there's a really low probability of getting the funding. I've certainly not gotten the funding many times, but sometimes you get the funding, and that can make all the difference. Even when you don't get the funding, writing that narrative for the grant can be incredibly helpful in generating new projects and in getting moving on a project. Caveat to that, I would say, is to not apply for funding or to agree to research collaborations for projects you don't have any enthusiasm for. I've also made that mistake a couple of times, and then you get the funding or find yourself in a collaboration that you're not super excited about. You have to be careful. You'll continue to hear about saying yes to too many service requests, but I think it's really worth taking the time to be involved in what Roy called continuing education. So programs like Professors for the Future, leadership programs, developing your teaching, mentoring skills, it really is worthwhile to continue to do those types of things. And if you are, particularly if you're a woman or a minority, if you're not involved with the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, I would highly encourage you to get involved. They're an independent professional development organization that does training and mentoring for faculty members, postdocs, grad students, and they have a real depth of resources. And then I'll wrap up here because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. But my final advice is don't work all the time. This isn't even just a marathon. This is an ultra run, not a sprint. Don't neglect relationships, even short term. Don't neglect relationships or physical health or rest or having fun. Like Rebecca said, success is really about persistence. It's not about how fast you do it. Being the hardest worker or the smartest or having the most brilliant thing to say at a particular time. It's really a lot about persistence, and for persistence you really need to be able to do it for the long haul. And this is your life, so take the time to develop those other areas of your life. So looking forward to what questions people have.
Well, thank you to all our speakers. That was really wonderful. And I'll just say, in my position as Associate Dean of Research and Grad Studies, I often talk to graduate students, and they often exist really in isolation. And hearing from people who have gone through it and sort of the sage advice I've heard here, the wonderful advice, how important that is for students and postdocs to really reach out to others and get advice from many different people and mentors, and how valuable that is. So I will start with the first question, which is, I guess this is to any of our panelists, so feel free. What tips, techniques would you recommend to deal with imposter syndrome? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll start, because I was actually thinking about that based on what was just said in the previous talk about going to some place where everyone else has, or you feel like other people have Ivy League degrees or things like that. And as someone with an Ivy League degree, of course, I'm probably not the right one to answer this, but I work with an REU students, so some undergraduates who do research with us in the summer, and we specifically select students from schools that don't have big research programs, and they are excellent, and many of them come to us and end up doing their PhDs here. And I actually think that the big name schools, it's probably the students who maybe even get by more on the name than the students who really have to work extra hard to maybe overcome the lack of name recognition. So for those who out there feel like, oh, this person has a degree from someplace else, if you want to flip the script a little bit, you might want to think that those people are getting by on their institutional name rather than, I'm not saying, but an approach is to realize that you've done the work, you've earned your PhD, you've done all the same effort, and just because they, especially now with admission rates that are so low to these places, it's really not a reflection of who you are, like what degree you have or anything like that. So that's one aspect of it that I even on our admissions committee had to admonish one of my colleagues who was like, oh, but this person got a degree from like the MIT of India, and therefore they must be great. And I was like, but look at their application materials, So that I just think it doesn't mean that much anymore. And to try how to internalize that, I don't know, but I definitely see that as the truth.
I'm going to hop in and ask a follow-up question, and I'll aim it for Rebecca, which is, what techniques or tips would you recommend to deal with getting the answer no? Like my rule is always you get to cry in the bathtub for an hour and then you have to pull your socks up and deal, but you're muted. But please, any strategies that you've learned for hearing no's? Because I know you've had a lot of yeses, but a lot of yeses usually means a lot of no's in the back of the tree.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think this is in some ways an extension of the previous one, and I will say that with the question around imposter syndrome, I think that imposter syndrome is about belonging, feelings of belonging. And so the thing that I've asked myself to in moments when I am questioning, do I belong? I'm asking myself, why is that? Or alternatively, when I feel that I belong, why do I feel that I belong, right? What are the feelings or what are the structures that are making me feel that way? So I think correspondingly, when we get no's, in some ways it feels as if we're being told, you don't belong here, right? You aren't good enough for, this isn't the right thing. And I think that my solution to this has been an extension of that persistence around like constantly kind of putting things out there, casting a wide net, so that in some ways that if, some things come back as no, well, then that thing wasn't supposed to be, but there's other things that are already out there that possibly could be, right? That it's maybe that old adage of like, when one door closes, maybe another window opens. And this enables us to really think expansively about, first, did we even really want that thing in the first place, or were we just idealizing it? Or does this actually open up other opportunities for our new adventures, or also opportunities to rest? This is something that I admit I struggle with, is reminding myself to actually do less. I'm very inclined to just get on the hamster wheel. But now I'm taking no as a positive of, what, maybe this is time actually to think about new opportunities, or to read, or to meditate, or to do other things that rejuvenate us for other opportunities down the road that are now open because this other thing we thought we wanted has been closed.
All right, I'll ask a question. This could be for anyone of you or all of you. Several of you mentioned how the Professors of the Future program helped you better prepare for after graduate school, particularly an academic career, but not necessarily only an academic career. But sticking to the academic career, whatever that might be, what I'm wondering is the following: what was the most important thing that you learned in the program about how to navigate a university? I think is how Tricia put it. And then secondly, once you were navigating the university, what was surprising to you that maybe you weren't prepared for from the program or otherwise?
Maybe Tricia can start since you haven't spoken yet.
Sure. Yeah, so it's been a little while. I think I did the program in 2002, 2003. and it's a little hard to remember. I do remember, however, that I learned what a thumb drive was. They were just coming out, so that was really important. I think that what I got was a sense. So we each had to do a leadership project and design some project, and I think part of what I figured out was that nobody has it all figured out. Even people in higher levels of administration or full professors, everybody is still learning and still figuring things out. And so I think it was kind of empowering to realize that I could do a project as a grad student that actually had an impact, people were interested in, and so that kind of that I guess gave me some confidence to feel like I could play that kind of role in future jobs.
I could just chime in and saying that at that point in my graduate career, I was so shocked and excited to learn about just how expansive the academy was and just how many different roles that people can play in it. I did not know at that point about all of the different types of teaching and research positions that are available in the academy. And so this is also why I stress that people who are figuring out what they want to be doing in the academy, that there's so many different uses for their skill set. And PFTF was really helpful for me in seeing, like, I enjoy teaching, or I enjoy research, I enjoy administration, what do I enjoy? And there are lots of different opportunities within the academy to play a role there. And so I think that's really exciting to get to learn about what your particular institutions, UC Davis, the UC system is just one, but the Cal State system offers a whole nother. Community colleges, private institutions, they all have different names for different things. And so there's just lots more out there to continue to learn about.
And I wanted to quickly add that I think learning about treating being a professor, the teaching component of it as a professional thing, as opposed to just our research, was really important. And it actually, while many people or my colleagues might think it's extra work to know how to teach well, it actually has made teaching a lot easier for me and less time consuming to know how to do it right and have resources. So regardless of what people around you are saying, like, oh, just put your head down and do research, I think investing in having those skills and being ready to deploy them is very useful.
All right, we've reached the end of the time for our webinar. I'd like to thank again all three of our speakers. What wonderful points to help future grad students, postdocs, and research. It's really so important to hear different paths and the advice on how to persist through the process. So thank you again, and I'd like to thank again the professors for the future and their celebratory season this year. What a wonderful program for UC Davis. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again for participating to our panelists, and we'll see you next in 30 more years, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you.